I'm Brian Kilmeade.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm David Asman, and this is the Fox News Rundown. Monday, April 24th, 2023, I'm Mike Emanuel. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy wants to sit down and negotiate with President Biden as the nation's debt sits at $31 trillion and counting. The first critical step will come this week when McCarthy tries to pass his debt plan in the House.
It's now time to circle the wagons, be team players, and get behind the Limit, Save, Grow Act.
Congressman Guy Reschenthaler is a Pennsylvania Republican, also a key member of the GOP whip team, trying to round up the necessary votes.
I'm Chris Foster. There's a lot of construction work to be done in America and not enough people to do it.
If we've got people in this country that are ready, willing, and able to work, then it is imperative that we look at opportunities to engage those people in meaningful, life-sustaining careers.
And I'm David Marcus. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
The nation's debt is $31 trillion, a number hard to fathom, and it is growing every day. There is pressure to increase the debt ceiling, the government's ability to borrow money. But for leading Republicans, signing off for more debt is a tough vote. So House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is calling for negotiation with President Biden to do something to course correct out of control government spending.
I'm beginning to wonder about the words that he says and the thoughts that he's using, because the idea that he won't even negotiate for more than 80 days, he is now putting the country in default. We're the only ones being responsible and sensible about this.
Some moderate Democrats, like West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, are expressing concern about the president's unwillingness to negotiate with McCarthy. Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell has also said leaders should sit down and talk and ultimately raise the borrowing cap.
We need to pay our bills. We need to honor them. And if we were into any way, shape, or form default on our spending, our working men and women across the country would have immediate consequences.
Congressman Dusty Johnson, a South Dakota Republican, is a member of the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus.
We can't get the president to the negotiating table. And so there are a group, a bipartisan group, Democrats or Republicans, who've come together to say, Mr. President, you have to come to the table.
White House senior advisor Mitch Landrieu laid out Mr. Biden's position on CNN's The Lead with Jake Tapper.
I think what the president would like to see happen is for the grown-ups in the room to basically just pass a debt ceiling bill like they've done many times before.
But if Congress rubber stamps a debt increase, that takes the pressure off, and lawmakers will go back to arguing about other issues without addressing spending, as inflation continues to hurt hardworking Americans across the country.
Well, I think you see it every day where people are struggling to fill up their gas tanks. They're struggling at the grocery store.
Guy Reschenthaler is the chief deputy whip in the House, a Pennsylvania Republican.
Really crunch trying to make their paycheck last longer. I mean, the inflationary rate might be around 10 or 11%, but if you look at consumer products and also energy costs, it's up even further. So in a real sense, the Biden economy has robbed the average American family of somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000 a year. And just to put that in perspective, the average American, it would be like taking 1 month of their salary away from them just due to inflation.
We're heading into summer, which is the big summer travel season. There are concerns the prices at the pump will once again go up. Do you think inflation will still be top of mind for consumers in the coming months?
I think, Mike, until we get this spending under control, until we stop this war on American energy that the Biden administration has waged, I think we're going to be dealing with inflation. We got to realize that we have inflation really for two reasons. Number one, the Democrats and the Biden administration pumped way too much money into this economy well after COVID was over. Number two is when they cracked down on American energy, it made the cost of oil and gas go up, which made every single consumer product more expensive. Not only energy costs, but think about it. You need gasoline and diesel to get farm products, agricultural products, to market, so the consumer is paying more. You need low energy costs to keep manufacturing costs low. They're not low, so now everything we manufacture costs a little bit more. So in a real sense, the inflation is also driven by this war on energy. We should unleash American energy, have American energy independence, low energy costs, and that would help the average American greatly.
In a recent statement, you discussed House Republicans' newly introduced Limit, Save, Grow Act of 2023. Can you tell me a little bit about what's being proposed in this? And you're the chief deputy whip in the House Republican Conference. What's your pitch to your fellow members?
Well, my pitch is this. We've got to be reasonable, sensible, and responsible when it comes to the debt limit. Everybody in Washington, D.C. knows the debt limit will be raised. The question is, how much influence will Republicans have on raising the debt limit? The more influence we have, the more spending reforms we can have. If we allow Chuck Schumer to negotiate this, if we allow some of our moderate members to break in the House and join the Democrats, they'll have a clean debt ceiling increase. So it's now time to circle the wagons, be team players, and get behind the Limit, Save, Grow Act. So we have a framework to present to the Senate. So Kevin McCarthy has a seat at the table, and he has the most powerful seat at the table because he can prove that he has 218 votes for this act. It's going to be the biggest spending reform ever in the history of Congress. What we're doing is we're limiting spending to FY22, fiscal year 22 levels, and then capping growth at 1% for 10 years. That in and of itself is going to save taxpayers money. It's going to stop the growth of government, and it's really going to limit Congress's ability to recklessly spend in the future. Then you're saving taxpayers money at the same time by having Medicaid work requirements. And then most importantly is the growth aspects of this. We're going to insist that elements of H.R. 1, that's our energy plan, that gets passed. So we're going to unleash American energy. And then also we're going to have the REINS Act, which is going to rein in the bureaucracy requiring congressional approval for any administrative decision that scores over $100 million. That will help get these unelected career bureaucrats under control and once again accountable to the people.
As the chief deputy whip, how's it looking? Do you think you'll get there with the votes?
I think we're going to get 218. I'm optimistic. You know, a lot of people look at our party and they see fractures. They see all these differences. That's welcome to the Republican Party. We're the party of ideas. We're the party that has the biggest tent. We've got everything from folks from the Deep South Bible Belt to other folks now that would be more on the moderate side. And you've got libertarians within the party, or certainly people with libertarian streaks. That's good for the party because that means we have a robust discussion. We have multiple viewpoints. It makes it harder to whip. It makes it harder to get a package together. But ultimately, that's good for the party and that's good for the country. The Democrats, by contrast, are totally in lockstep. The way one votes, the way they all vote. There's very little ideological diversity in that party, and that party continues to move quickly to the left. The Republicans are much more steady because we have all these different opinions already at the table.
Do you feel like pressure is building on President Biden to sit down and negotiate, even from his fellow Democrats who are getting uncomfortable with his position? Because, look, after all, everybody has run up this tremendous national debt. Doesn't everybody need to be at the table to figure out how to handle it?
Yeah, the pressure is mounting on Joe Biden. Just the fact that last week we introduced the Limit, Grow, Save Act forced a lot of the House Democrats, for example, Congresswoman Dingell, they called out President Biden to come back to the negotiating table and actually sit down with Kevin McCarthy. So just having this plan in place is putting pressure on Biden. And remember, Biden has voted 4 or 5 times to raise the debt ceiling with spending reforms. He's on record in 2004 saying he would only vote for a debt ceiling increase if we had spending reform measures attached to it. The difference here is that his party has moved drastically to the left. Joe Biden has also moved to the left to reflect his own party. But he's got to remember what he has done in the past and what's right for the economy and the American people.
Speaker McCarthy recently said that if the debt ceiling crisis is ignored over the next 10 years, 17.5% of Americans' taxes will be used to pay interest on our national debt. What other chaos do you think would be caused if this is not handled properly?
Well, the biggest issue is if we lose the reserve currency status of the world. I don't think many Americans, I don't think a lot of people even focus on this because we take it for granted. The fact that the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency gives us so much power and clout on the international stage and domestically as well. Because we're the reserve currency, we can to a large extent determine the value of the U.S. dollar. Also with petroleum, the Saudis, for example, will only sell oil, well, at least until very recently, would only sell petroleum US dollars. That gave us a lot of influence on the cost of petroleum. If we lose the reserve currency status, then we lose the ability to control the price of the dollar. We lose the ability to have some influence over the cost of petroleum. Also, we lose the ability to sanction. Right now, we can sanction a lot of these rogue regimes, Russia, North Korea, Venezuela, and we can do it rather effectively because we're the reserve currency status. If we have a breakdown in that, we lose the ability to have sanctions on these rogue regimes. So you can't really overstate the catastrophe that it would be if we lose our reserve currency status. That's why the responsible, sensible, reasonable thing to do is increase the debt ceiling, but do it with the spending reforms in place, which will get the spending under control, that will put us in a position where we can actually pay off our national debt.
Unless there have been some back-channel conversations, talks between President Biden and Speaker McCarthy have been rare. I remember at one meeting, but it seems like it's difficult to get the president to the table with the House Speaker. When did that become such a bad thing for both sides to sit down and talk about the big issues of the day?
Well, when that occurred, I don't know, but it's, Kevin McCarthy talks a lot about the days of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. We had negotiations between two parties that come together on what we could agree on for the benefit of the American people. Right now, what you see from the left is you see the identity politics, where your politics becomes your identity. And anybody that doesn't agree with you is now an affront to your personality, they're an affront to your person. People get way too sensitive on the left when they disagree or there's policy differences. They need to get beyond that. They need to say, look, we can have policy differences, we can have disagreements, but at the end of the day, we're elected to do a job. It's time to come to the table and negotiate.
Let's talk about a little foreign policy issue, actually a big foreign policy issue, but China and Taiwan. We've seen bipartisan lawmakers go to Taiwan. You had the House Speaker meet with the Taiwanese delegation in California. Your thoughts on this threatening crisis overseas?
So the risk of war is a real thing right now. The Chinese are certainly preparing for war. They want to invade Taiwan, and they've been very articulate that they want to do it before the 100th anniversary of the communist victory after World War II. So that would be roughly 2027. So we've got to make sure that we prepare Taiwan for an invasion in order to deter an invasion. So we need to make sure whatever the Taiwanese need, we need to do foreign military funding, we need financing rather. We also need to make sure that we're selling them the amount of arms they want. If you look at what happened with Ukraine, I would argue and submit that we would have been able to prevent the war in Ukraine had we provided the Ukrainians with everything they were asking for before the invasion. Remember, Biden still hasn't given them the MiGs. He still hasn't given them long-range missiles, for example, and that has protracted the war. With Taiwan, we should learn from our lessons that we need to get that island ready to deter conflict. But Mike, if we allow China to take Taiwan, it's the end of America hegemony. We are no longer the sole superpower in the world. We are sharing the stage with communist China, which would be disastrous for the globe. So we've got to realize what's at stake here. And then in terms of the economic impact, if you think the cost of oil ticked up a little bit because Putin invaded Ukraine, or the cost of grain went up, just wait until we can't get semiconductor chips from Taiwan. They have a staggering market share on microchips, and some of the best microchips in the world that's needed to go into everything from a cell phone to a fighter jet. So if China invades Taiwan and Taiwan falls and we lose the microchip supply, our economy in our supply chains are going to be in a disastrous position, which could further the recession.
He's the Chief Deputy Whip, Congressman Guy Reschenthaler of Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for your time. Busy week ahead. Have a good week.
Thanks, Mike. You too.
This is David Marcus with your Fox News commentary coming up.
President Biden's made infrastructure spending a big part of his agenda.
To have the strongest economy in the world, we have to have the best infrastructure in the world. How in God's name can we lead the world with a second-rate infrastructure? The best roads, the best bridges, the best airports, the cleanest water, high-speed internet, and so much more. Can you believe that we used to be the best infrastructure rated #1 in the world? Know we're rated now internationally? We're rated number 13.
The president, speaking to labor union members in Maryland last week, he signed a $1 trillion infrastructure spending bill into law a year and a half ago, meant to pour money into projects around the country. Problem is, there aren't enough people to actually do all the work. There's a construction worker shortage.
Right now, over 500,000 workers just to do the work we've currently got on the books. And when you start injecting even more projects there, it just increases that number. Greg
Sizemore is with the Associated Builders and Contractors Trade Association. He's vice president there of Health, Safety, Environment, and Workforce Development.
I've been in this business since the late 70s when I really started. It's just never been that career choice that people have chosen. I like to say it's the best kept secret in America, that the men and women that build the infrastructure, build the buildings, places that we stay, pray, heal, and play in, quite frankly, that career choice, if you will, has not been something that many people have been pushed to or towards. For example, success in America is defined by the college or university that you may have gone to, but I think the men and women that complete apprenticeship programs, whether they be government registered apprenticeship programs or a classic kind of an industry-driven apprenticeship program, have just as much pedigree and degree, if you will, as those men and women that spend their time in college.
Yeah, I know lately there's been at least a bit of an uptick in apprenticeships again, some of that actually in white-collar industries, and not necessarily the trades, as people realize, man, I'm just not getting my bang for the buck with college. And for years, for decades, the government, and I guess like you kind of said, society pushed people toward college as a way of making more money down the line, but that may have topped out.
Well, again, I think it's just supply and demand. The men and women that are seeing the value of coming into our industry. I mean, think about it this way, Chris. If you hire on with most construction companies in America today, those men and women have a debt-free education, meaning they're working during the day and getting their education at night. So as they grow through this system, they're not ending up at the end of a 4-year dream with a mountain full of debt. They're ending up with a net zero proposition there that says you have no debt, but yet you've got the license and the degree, if you will, to do your trade. The ecosystem of the industry is what a lot of people don't understand, that these men and women that go out there and learn these skills in their trades, respective of what it may be, electrical, mechanical, et cetera, many of these men and women go on to own their own companies. Many of these men and women will eventually go back to college and get a degree in project management or construction management.
Yeah. How much of the shortage is pandemic related? Did people leave the industry and not come back?
I think what everybody has to understand that construction, with the exception of just a few very, very specific locations, was deemed essential throughout the pandemic, Chris. Men and women had to get up every morning and go build the places, the hospitals, maintain the hospitals, even take and turn hotels and motels into receiving centers for patients, even to the degree that they took a ship in New York and flipped it into. So this is a situation where there's a misnomer out there that the men and women went away from construction. They actually stayed engaged mostly throughout. And so many of our contractors had to pump the brakes, if you will, and we had to relook at a few things here, there, and yon about how we administered the work and the health and the safety and the hygiene. But the vast majority of construction in America today continued throughout the pandemic. That said, we have what we call the gray tsunami happening in the construction industry today, where if you haven't been pushing people toward this industry for many, many decades now, well, those of us that are in it are about ready to get out of it. And as a result of that, attrition is becoming quite problematic as well. And so you've got this big number that's rising out there, as you stated early on. And then you've got this back door, if you will, that's lots larger than the front door coming into the trade.
Yeah. And if you compare it to something, if it's analogous to something like birth rates and death rates, you've got more people, forgive me, dying than being born. And also those people that are retiring, you're not only losing quantity, you're losing quality because you're losing a lot of expertise on the back end.
Absolutely. And so when you really begin to think of this, the average age of a construction worker out in the workforce today is between 45 and 47 years old. So you're exactly right. There's a lot of educational earned knowledge, if you will, that will exit the workplace when these men and women tap out. But what we're seeing, the contractors are actually engaging them, maybe not working on their tools every day, maybe not supervising a crew every day or even a project, but they're bringing them back in, keeping them on a short leash and using that expertise to both mentor this younger generation that's coming into our industry. But I want to also point out, I think this is important, many of the seasoned professionals in our industry are being mentored by a generation that has grown up with this technology in their hand. And so that misnomer about technology going to replace the human, no, we're just going to have to teach the human how to use the technology.
The money's there for the projects. Is there money for training and recruitment and, I don't know, bonuses maybe that employers might need to bring something into the industry? Do you think there's part of the infrastructure bill wasn't allocated correctly?
Well, we can sit here all day and pick apart the bits and pieces that we agree or disagree with. What we need to understand is we're going to have to invest in workforce development. Frankly, Associated Builders and Contractors and our members understand that, Chris. Our members invest a certain portion of their payrolls. They allocate that to craft and or professional skills development there. And so, yes, those costs are passed along to the developers or the owners or the construction users. We know that. I mean, you can't just invest in someone and never get that ROI. At some point in time, you've got to translate those costs. But what we try to do at our association is make sure that our chapters are in the right, best place to meet the needs of their contractors in their zip codes, because it's going to change wherever you are in the country, Chris. Really, you think about the industrial Gulf Coast, or you think about Middle America, where you're going to have a different type of environment there versus the bigger projects that are happening around the Gulf Coast. So the reality of this whole thing is yes, we're going to have to find the money. We're going to invest in workforce development, and we're going to meet this demand, or we're going to have to change the whole process about when we're going to deploy this work into the system.
Skilled trade jobs, even more entry-level jobs. I mean, they've always sort of been considered, decent paying jobs at least, if not always very, very lucrative, at least decent paying, and sometimes more than decent. If you're a master electrician, for example, or a master carpenter. Have wages risen along with other industries, or is the pay maybe less attractive than it used to be?
I would tell you the pay outpaces just about every other industry sector out there. The wages, because it's such a tight market, Chris, are literally driving a lot of people to choose who they're working for. And so when you can see that an electrician can make anywhere between 20 to 35 or 40 bucks an hour, that's a career-sustaining, life-sustaining wage right there. I don't care what part of the country you are in. And some of these men and women and some of these high specialty, like, high crane operators or welders, they're making six figures. And again, they've gotten this education without incurring any debt. And that's the thing that America needs to understand. That's the thing that a society needs to embrace here. And then I also want to say that think about the construction management professionals that are coming out of the universities around America. We graduate around 4,000 construction management professionals across our university system every year. The young men and young women that are coming out of those programs, most of them are walking out with 3 or 4 offers. They're at $60,000 to $70,000, even $80,000 a year starting jobs, and many contractors are paying off their college debt. So construction is something that everybody needs to begin to look at. There's plenty of reason driving people in that direction.
Does immigration policy play a role in any of this? Would you like to see more work visas, or with that much of a shortfall, can you fill those holes with just people that are in the country currently?
We're always looking at opportunities to embrace the immigrants that are in America today and employ them legally. We've got a problem in America, just the way we look at immigration. And, it can polarize a lot of different people. But if we've got people in this country that are ready, willing, and able to work, then it is imperative that we look at opportunities to engage those people in meaningful, life-sustaining careers that are going to add value not only to America, but add value to them as well.
Yeah. What specific areas are sort of in most need and maybe not so much. Where would you encourage somebody looking to get into the trades to go in terms of specialties, if they can get themselves skilled enough to do those jobs?
Well, again, we have a vast network at our association, and there are others out there, and I want to be honest and upfront when I say that. At the end of the day, community colleges across America are looking at career technical education, but we've got to start younger than that. Back in the day, again, I hate to use that term, but I've been around this business for well over 40 years. You had career technical education that happened in the shop classes in middle schools and even in the later years of elementary school. So we really need to go back and revisit the necessity to put those opportunities in place for the young people of America that choose the careers in construction. But we have to look out there at places like abc.org, where you can look at your zip code and you can see what's available right there in your region. You have to look at the different spaces and places that are offering those career technical education opportunities, whether they be community colleges or even a for-profit business. They're out there. And as we begin to look at just the simple numerics of it, this is where we've got an opportunity to really look at those industry-driven apprenticeship programs, meaning this is my value proposition. I don't need this person to go through a 4-year program on all of this. This is what I do. I do this very, very well. For example, I'm a drywall installer. You don't necessarily have to be a carpenter, if you will, to put that in. So we have to give the contracting community the flexibility to employ the people, make their skill sets a value proposition right out there in the workspace.
We've been talking to Greg Sizemore with the Associated Builders and Contractors Trade Association. He's Vice President of Health, Safety, Environment, and Workforce Development there. Greg, thanks for coming on the Fox News Rundown.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris.
Here's a look at the week ahead.
Monday, the so-called Tennessee Three will be at the White House. The trio of Democratic lawmakers face an expulsion vote over their participation in a gun violence protest on the State House floor. Gloria Johnson survived the vote. Justin Jones and Justin Pearson were both expelled, but were soon reinstated by their local councils. Tuesday, the suspect accused of murdering Cash App founder Bob Lee is back in a California court. A tech consultant is accused of stabbing the exec after the two had an argument about the suspect's sister. Wednesday, the Republican presidential field gets a little bigger. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson will formally announce his run for the GOP nomination. Thursday, the NFL Draft, taking place this year in Kansas City. The Carolina Panthers have the first pick. Friday, movie fans can once again head to a galaxy far, far away. Theaters around the country will screen Return of the Jedi in honor of the film's 40th anniversary. And that's a look at your week ahead. I'm Anna Eliopoulos, Fox News.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Subscribe and listen to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Former federal prosecutor and 4-term U.S. Congressman from South Carolina brings you a one-of-a-kind podcast. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
David Marcus.
What's on your mind?
Dire warnings abound as experts tell us that artificial intelligence is almost a reality, if it isn't already. Leaders in the technology, such as Elon Musk, have even called for a 6-month moratorium on AI research, citing existential threats. But in fact, this consensus is a myth. Not everyone who studies the field is convinced that AI is at hand, or that it's even ever possible. In 2020, Ragnar Fjelland, emeritus professor at the Center for the Study of Sciences and the Humanities at Bergen University, wrote an essay for the journal Nature titled Why General Artificial Intelligence Will Not Be Realized. It is long and complex, but very much worth reading as a caution not to accept the reality of AI too easily. Drawing on the work of scientists and philosophers dating back to Plato, the line from Fjelland that stands out is, quote, to put it simply, the overestimation of technology is closely connected with the underestimation of humans, unquote. The modern debate over AI began with mid-20th century scientist Alan Turing, who devised a set of tests. Most famous was the ability for AI to fool a human being into thinking they were speaking to another human being. This has more or less been achieved, but it's a deeply insufficient test to establish that a computer is engaged in human-style intelligence. Much of human knowledge and intelligence is tacit, not explained or devised. For example, as Fjellin points out, most humans know how to walk, but very few know how they walk. We do not teach our toddlers perambulation by showing them the math and physics of it. This is knowledge gained by experience with physical phenomena, not through pure mental exercise. In large part, the vastness of human intelligence is not so much contained in what we know, but in what we don't know and yet can do anyway. A significant reason why we do not hear these questions asked is that the experts we most often rely on to tell us if AI is real or achievable are themselves experts in AI. Of course they think it's real. They've dedicated their careers to it. Their funding depends upon it, which doesn't mean that they're wrong, but it does mean that they are an interested party in the debate, and that others, such as philosophers and theologians, have a role to play in these definitions. None of this is to suggest that machine learning will not have a major and potentially dangerous impact on society. Technology has been displacing human work since the ancients invented the plow. Might artificial intelligence be real and dangerous? Perhaps. But there's also an enormous danger in human beings holding the capacities of their own intelligence too cheap. AI is not a functioning model of the human mind, and dispossessing ourselves of that notion is key to understanding our technological age. Will there one day be a computer that can match the marvels of Shakespeare? For his part, the bard thinks not. What a piece of work is man, he wrote. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. Try though they may, all the Elon Musks and all of their men cannot create a computer that can compose or meet that criteria or that description of human intelligence. Human beings are still, first and foremost, the greatest storytellers of their own reality, and there is no good reason to believe that can or will ever change. I'm David Marcus, author of Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. And now, stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. Listen ad-free on Fox News Podcasts Plus on Apple Podcasts. And Prime members can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Janice Dean, Fox News senior meteorologist. Be sure to subscribe to the Janice Dean podcast at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to spread the sunshine.